Hey everybody, welcome back to Texas Reloading Room. My name is Justin. Today we're going to get into something a little bit adventurous, and a lot of you may think that it is a daunting task, but I assure you it is not. We're going to completely disassemble this, which is a Ruger new model Blackhawk. So let's go ahead and go over to the bench and get right down to nuts and bolts on this thing. Alright, so here in front of us is going to be all the tools that I found necessary to use for this particular project to get this down to bare bones parts. Now, some of these may be subjective, such as a pair of pliers. You don't absolutely need them, but I have found it helpful when I'm pulling pins. This is not absolutely necessary. I'm just using this to hold the hammer strut so the spring doesn't fly off. You can use a thick paper clip, a good sturdy paper clip, whatever works. That's what we're going to use this for. And you guys know with me, a 90-degree pick is always on my bench. I have a punch here, not because we are going to be actually doing any hammering, but you'll see why we're going to use this to actually set the spring back behind the hammer, or behind the trigger. The one quintessential piece of tooling that you will need is a good small tipped hollow ground flat point. So move my tools off to the side here. First thing we're going to want to do is take the grip screw out. And then gently pull the grip off of both sides. And set those aside. Leave your grip screw in, because there's another screw in the firearm that looks a lot like that and you don't want to get them mixed up. Next step is going to be to take the cylinder out. So open your loading gate and pull there. Just like that. We'll set the cylinder off to the side. And we can go ahead and lock that back in place for now. We'll be removing that later. Or actually, you know what? We could probably go ahead and take that off right now. So let's go ahead and take our ejector assembly off. It's just one screw. And don't let this fly away. It's got a good stiff spring in it. Set that off to the side. Now we can pull our cylinder guide out. And the next thing we're going to want to do, cock it, and you can see right here, that's where we are going to need to put a pin in to hold the spring from coming apart. So what I'm going to do is take my straight pick and insert it this way so that the handle is sticking out of the left side of the gun. And I just want to remember how this thing is oriented, because it is not capable of going in both ways. It only goes in one way to make it work. So now that that's secure, we'll start by removing these two screws behind the hammer. Now these are, I'd say, medium length screws, and they're both going to be identical. And if it's giving you some trouble, hopefully you've got a bottle of Croil on hand there at your bench that you can work into the threading. That stuff is like magic. Alright, so now on the bottom in front of the trigger guard, we've got a screw here that we're going to take out. Now this is a short little stubby thing, and that's the only place that this screw will go. Now on these two screws behind the trigger guard, you need to pay extra close attention because these are not the same. We'll go ahead and take this screw out first. And it's a little bit longer than the ones that we took out of the back, so you don't have to worry about mixing these screws up as long as you pay attention. Now this screw that's on the side of the loading gate is actually going to be almost twice the length. So don't forget which side you put them in. The longer screw will go on the side with the loading gate. See that screw right there. And now you can separate the frame from the grip. Now be very careful, there are a couple detents in here that could fly out and across the room if you're not careful. So gently pull back and up. There we go. Just like that. Okay. So we've got one detent down here, and you can pull that out if you want to. Detent and spring. And then this spring here, you can pull that out as well. I usually leave this as it is because the grip section doesn't actually get really that dirty. So you'd only have to really take that out if you're replacing it. And there is one more spring in here. You can see that. It goes actually behind the trigger to help force the trigger forward. I just leave that in there. I don't need to take it out. So we'll set that stuff off to the side. We're done with that for now. And the other detent is right here. Now do take this out because if you don't, you'll lose it. Okay. Now, the next thing that we're going to do is take out the hammer pin and the trigger pin. Now, do not bang on these and try to drive them out. They both have detents in them that will easily get caught on things, and these pins will just slide back and forth once you release the tension. So there's one spring here, and you can see it looks kind of like a hairpin almost. What we need to do is actually push that down, because that spring is resting on the detent for the trigger pin. Push it down, release the tension, and it doesn't hurt to have that punch here, so you can just kind of easy feed it in that hole and pull it right out. No hammer required. Okay, so now we have this, the trigger right there. We can go ahead and pull that out. Now it may come out with or without your blocker bar there. And when you pull the spring out, your loading gate will fall right off. It's not a problem at all. Now it looks like that bit's not actually going to come out until we pull the hammer pin. So let's go ahead and get the hammer pin out of the way. Go ahead and grab my punch again. This one likes to be a little bit finicky sometimes, so it might take you a couple of tries to get it. And once again, on the loading gate side, there is also a detent on this one as well. So we might need just a light tap to free that one up, but we will see here. So let's give it a little tap. And this is that one pin that I like having the pliers for, so we can grab on it, maybe, and work it out slowly. There we go. Just like that. Now both of these pins for the hammer and the trigger will have detents on one side, as you can see, both of those will always go down towards the side with the loading gate. And the hammer should just fall out. And right there we've got our transfer bar. And the firing pin and whatnot, you can just leave that in there. There's our hand. And there's also a detent in the hammer itself. Now this particular one is secured by a pin. I suggest that you leave that alone. Unless for some reason it's broken, don't even bother taking that out. Okay. So now basically, for all intents and purposes, that's about as far as you'd ever have to take it down unless you're actually having a problem with this. But you should never really have any issues with that. And then the two sights and the firing pin is the only other two pieces that are not actually part of this. So we've got all that apart. It's really not all that complex. We did it in what, about 10 minutes. Alright, so you've replaced what you needed to replace. You fixed what's broken. How do we put it back together? That's a good question. So what we can do then is we're just going to take pieces and put them back in the way we took them out. We'll put our hand back on our hammer, just like that. And we'll work that up into there. Next, take your trigger and sometimes you gotta look and see exactly how this goes. I even forget sometimes, but we're gonna reattach the transfer bar to the trigger, and I'm believing it goes just like this. Because there's a notch right here in this side, and you want that leg out on the transfer bar to go in there. And you might have to fiddle with the hammer or even pull it back out slightly to get all those pieces back in there. Oh, now it wanted to slip off there. Okay. Oh. Alright, that was my mistake, guys. That pin actually goes through this hole here, just like that. So the transfer bar feeds through that on that special loop, and you just need to make sure that you get it seated in there just right. There we go. Next, if you want to, you can go ahead and put your hammer pin back in. Remember, the hammer pin is the bigger pin and the detent goes towards the gate. Just a couple little love taps with my soft grip screwdriver there. Got the hammer pin seated in nice and easy. Alright, so now that the trigger's in, what we need to do is put this spring and our stop back in. So before you do either one of these, go ahead and put your loading gate back in, because that spring's what holds it in place. Alright, make sure it's sitting flush and that it's closed. this 90-degree leg will feed down into where the loading gate pin is, and that pin on this side needs to go into there, just like that. Go ahead and finagle those two pieces into place and make sure that your stop falls into the hole, and it should look just like that when you're done. Now the next bit is to get the trigger pin back in place, and I highly suggest feeding it in like that. Remember, the detent goes on the loading gate side. So start it in your hole, and as soon as you start it in, you're going to have to push that spring lead down so that it will actually feed through and over, and it will snap into place just like that. No issues at all. Next, double check to make sure that your loading gate didn't slip out. If it did, you'll have to go back and redo the last couple of steps. Go ahead and take your little detent and slip it right in there, just like that. Now that detent is what helps push the hand out to move the cylinder. And now we are ready to reattach our grip. So you take the grip, and if you took the hammer spring out, make sure that you insert it back in the way it is supposed to go. And this is where things do get just a little bit tricky, because you can't just simply assemble these two pieces. We're going to reference that that trigger spring that I talked about earlier on in the video, and hopefully you can see that it's sitting right there behind the trigger. We need to push that up underneath that ledge on the back of the trigger, and that's primarily what I use the punch for. So push it back behind the trigger and then slide it forward, and it'll be sitting flush just like that. Now we will take our two screws that go in the back, these two, and go ahead and thread those in and tighten them down. Do not ever force a screw. If you're having to force a screw, then it's probably either not going in right or you already stripped it. Okay. Next one we're going to take is the really short screw that goes in front of the trigger guard, and I'm going to go ahead and tighten that down. Now the two different size screws. Remember what I said about the longer one going on the side of the loading gate? That feeds into the detent in the hammer pin. We're going to go ahead and feed that one in now. So that one goes in the bottom behind the trigger guard. And now the shorter one on the other side. Alright. Now let's go ahead and reinsert our cylinder guide here and reattach our ejector assembly. And I would recommend putting some blue Loctite on this screw if you can. I have found that my ejector screw likes to come off, and I have actually lost the ejector assembly downrange once or twice. Okay, let's go ahead and put our cylinder back in. Close your loading gate. And now we need to line up this hammer strut. So make sure that your cup here at the bottom is resting on that ledge like it should be. And then pull your hammer back, remove your pin, and release it forward. Before we put the grips back on, let's go ahead and verify function. Everything appears to be working just fine, so let's go ahead and put the grips on. And I will suggest the grip screw, do not tighten that down too much because you will actually crush your grips, and or you will pull the metal threading through the grip and it will fail to function. Alright. So hopefully you found this video enlightening and helpful in your quest to know more about your Ruger Blackhawk, or perhaps you were interested in picking up a Blackhawk but you wanted to learn more about it before you did. These are beautiful firearms. Now they are old style, loading gate, single action only, so you can't squeeze the trigger and have the hammer pull back. You have to pull the hammer back and get it ready like that. I love this firearm. It is very accurate. Now one thing to note, there are different Blackhawks. This is not the original style that they had. The older ones are what we like to call 3-screw, and they disassemble more like a conventional revolver would, not this specialized take apart. Of course, this is a very reminiscent of some of the older Colt revolvers, but you know, it's two main kinds. If you learn how to do this and you learn how to do the ones with the side plate, you got revolvers down to a T almost. So anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I hope you learned something. If you have any questions at all about this, leave those down in the comments box below, and I'll do my best to answer them as soon as I can. Leave me a thumbs up, and if you haven't subscribed to the channel, go ahead and do that. We've got great content coming all the time, and I'm always open to suggestions about what you want to see. Once again, thank you so much for watching. My name is Justin, and I'll see you in the next video.